I woke up lying on a cold, unforgiving floor in a pitch-black room. My body protested as I shifted, a dull ache radiating from my joints, a reminder that I'd been here far too long. My mind felt like an empty void, a barren expanse of nothingness, struggling to grasp at even a shred of clarity. Blinking into the darkness, I tried to take in my surroundings. The room was silent and suffocating, its walls devoid of windows. That explained the oppressive blackness. Slowly, I pushed myself upright. My legs trembled beneath me, threatening to give way. I wobbled but managed to catch myself before collapsing again. Have I been kidnapped? The thought was intrusive, unwelcome. Yet, as I glanced around, I found nothing to confirm it. No ropes, no chairs, no ominous tools of restraint. Just emptiness. Relief flickered faintly, but it was short-lived. I shuffled toward one of the walls, running my hands along its surface, the chill biting into my fingertips. The space felt small, claustrophobic, like a modest bedroom stripped bare. My hand brushed against the outline of a door. I groped for the handle and finally felt its cold metal beneath my fingers. A sharp shiver ran through me as I twisted it, but the door didn't budge. Locked. A sharp, searing pain erupted in my skull. It came suddenly, like a bullet tearing through my thoughts. My knees buckled, and memories surged forward, disjointed and cruel, headlights blinding me, the screech of tires, the terror, and the unbearable agony. I clutched my head, squeezing my eyes shut, desperate to block out the onslaught. When I opened them again, the pain had ebbed, leaving a hollow ache behind. I sank to the floor, dazed, my breathing shallow. A single, horrifying question crept into my mind. Am I dead? I whispered into the silence, the words trembling as they left my lips. As if summoned by my voice, a door swung open with a groan, flooding the room with blinding light. I raised an arm to shield my eyes from the sudden glare, my heart pounding like a drum. Two figures stepped into the room. The first man was tall, his silhouette sharp against the light. As my vision adjusted, I could make out his features, a head of bright blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to cut through me. And then, the real terror began. The second figure stepped forward, a smaller man with shaggy brown hair that hung just above his eyes. His green eyes darted around the room, quick and calculating. Both were dressed sharply in immaculate suits, an odd contrast to the wings protruding from their backs. The wings seemed too large, too artificial, but my attention shifted when they grinned, wide, unnatural smiles that revealed rows of perfectly white teeth. "Welcome to heaven, Jason Gray," the taller one said, his voice smooth and practiced, like a salesman trying to win a hesitant customer. "Heaven?" I repeated, disbelief dripping from the word. They nodded in unison, their unsettling grins frozen in place. My mind churned. Heaven? How? I wasn't a saint. Far from it. Sure, I wasn't evil, but I wasn't religious either. What had brought me here? Why am I here? I asked, the confusion etched deeply into my expression. Because everyone goes to heaven, the tall one replied, his tone exuding calmness. Hell is just a lie, a story to steer people in the right direction. Ultimately, all souls end up here. His delivery was polished, almost mechanical, as though he had recited this explanation countless times. Before I could respond, the shorter one piped up, practically bouncing with excitement. We're here to take you on a tour of heaven. A tour? I echoed, unease creeping into my voice. Slowly, I pushed myself up, standing once more. Follow us, the tall one commanded, striding toward the door. I hesitated, but curiosity and fear urged me forward. As they turned their backs, my eyes locked onto their wings. My breath caught in my throat. The wings weren't natural. They were stitched on, the sutures crude and jagged, as though whoever had done the work was rushed, or the subject had resisted. What kind of place was this? Blinding white light filled my vision as I stepped through the doorway. Instinctively, I turned back, only to find the door I'd come through had vanished, leaving behind nothing but smooth, blank space. My chest tightened. The shorter one giggled at my reaction, a sound that grated against my nerves, and motioned for me to follow. I turned back to face the path ahead. The light faded, revealing a massive factory. Angels in soiled work clothes moved through the space, pushing carts piled high with lumpy objects. The air was thick with an acrid smell, and I struggled to discern what these objects were. A nearby worker caught my eye. She was striking, her hair the warm hue of autumn leaves, her eyes a deep amber that reminded me of whiskey catching the sun. For a moment, the chaos around us faded, and I managed a tentative smile. She noticed and turned to return it. And then I saw her face. Her lower jaw was missing. My stomach lurched. Where her jaw should have been was a grotesque mass of exposed muscle and sinew. Her smile wasn't a smile at all, just a grim distortion of what should have been. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. "Oh God," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was calling to anymore. The shorter one giggled again. "Keep up," he called, motioning me forward. But my feet felt rooted to the ground. My gaze lingered on the workers and the unsettling cargo they hauled. "Heaven," they said. What kind of heaven was this? Half of her face looked as though it had been burned away. The flesh was raw, charred in places, and her teeth and gums were horrifyingly exposed, gleaming bone and pink tissue in stark, grotesque contrast. It was the only part of her mutilated face that seemed intact. I averted my eyes, bile rising in my throat. The sight lingered in my mind even as I looked away, seared into my memory. My guides, however, didn't seem to notice or care about my obvious revulsion. Their fixed, unnerving smiles remained unchanged. "What exactly is this place?" I managed to ask, though my voice wavered. "Heaven," they replied in perfect, unsettling unison. I shook my head. "No, heaven is supposed to have pearly gates and cherubs, right?" They exchanged a glance that felt condescending, like parents humoring a child asking an innocent but naive question. "All will be explained soon, Jason," the taller one said, his smile stretching just a little wider. The pit in my stomach deepened. Their smiles weren't comforting, they were predatory. I wanted to respond, to demand answers, but all I could do was choke back my rising nausea and follow them. What else could I do? As we continued, I found myself unable to look away from the carts being pushed through the endless corridors. At first, the contents were just vague, lumpy shapes, but now they were unmistakably human-shaped. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that my mind was twisting the images in this surreal nightmare. But the further we walked, the harder it was to deny the truth. 1,000 questions swirled in my head, but I couldn't voice a single one. The hallways twisted and turned endlessly, a labyrinth of sterile, colorless walls, each lined with 7 identical doors. No markers, no signs, nothing to distinguish one place from another. How did anyone navigate this place? I wondered. More importantly, how could I possibly escape? Abruptly, the 2 angels stopped in front of a door. It looked like all the others, plain, unremarkable. The shorter one turned the handle and pushed it open, holding it for me. I hesitated, peering inside. A surgical table dominated the room, its metal surface gleaming under a harsh, sterile light. Nearby, a tray of instruments lay neatly arranged, scalpels, forceps, needles. My gaze drifted to a pair of wings hanging from a hook on the wall. The sight made my stomach drop. My mind raced to connect the dots. No, I stammered, stumbling backward until my back hit the wall. My chest heaved as panic took hold. "No. Backing out isn't an option," the tall one said, his voice unyielding. He stepped forward and gripped my arm with an inhuman strength, dragging me toward the room despite my desperate attempts to resist. "No! Let me go!" I shouted, my feet slipping on the smooth floor as I tried to dig in and pull away. The short one stood by the door, watching with the patient air of someone who'd seen this play out countless times. Before I knew it, I was inside. The tall angel forced me down onto the cold, unyielding table, and the shorter one quickly moved to secure the leather straps, binding me in place. I thrashed and screamed, but the restraints held firm. "Let me go!" I screeched, my voice cracking with desperation. "Please, calm down. All will be explained now, Jason," the tall one said, his voice hollow, devoid of any genuine emotion. He turned to the tray and carefully picked up a scalpel, examining it with meticulous precision. "Oh. Can I do it this time?" the shorter one squealed, clapping his hands with childlike glee. Their exchange sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I strained against the restraints with every ounce of strength I had, screaming until my throat felt raw. But deep down, I knew there was no escape. This wasn't heaven. It couldn't be. It was something far worse. The tall angel sighed and rolled his eyes, reluctantly handing the scalpel to his companion. "Try not to mess up like last time," he warned, his voice tinged with irritation. "Last time?" I blurted out, panic surging through me. My eyes darted between the two of them, my terror mounting. The shorter one giggled like a mischievous child, ignoring my question as he approached with the blade. He adjusted the surgery table, propping it upright and revealing a slot that aligned perfectly with my back. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that they had done this many times before. "You see, Jason," the tall one began, his tone unnervingly calm, "you have been fortunate enough to be selected for the esteemed role of an angel." Behind me, I could feel the shorter one slicing through my shirt, the cold blade grazing my skin. "But why me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "I'm not even religious. I don't believe in any of this crap." The shorter one didn't answer. Instead, he began making precise incisions near my shoulder blades. A sharp, burning pain shot through me. I clenched my teeth, determined not to scream. "And that," the tall one continued, ignoring my protests, "is exactly why you've been chosen. Because you never devoted yourself to God during your time on Earth. Here, you must." The scalpel bit deeper into my flesh. I could feel hot, sticky blood trickling down my back in thin rivulets. My breath hitched as the pain intensified. Those who were faithful during their lives have no need for such devotion here. They finally become one with God, as they wished, the tall angel said. His tone was detached, clinical. Fully become one? I repeated internally, my mind reeling. What did that mean? Before I could dwell on it, movement in the corner of my vision caught my attention. The shorter angel was carrying the wings from the wall, positioning them near the incisions he had made. The sight was horrifying, but I barely registered it. I was too consumed by the tall angel's cryptic words. My thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a sharp prick at the side of my neck. A syringe. Cold liquid seeped into my veins, and my head began to swim. "It's better if you're asleep for this part of the procedure," the tall one explained, his voice distant. "No, wait," I tried to say, but the words came out slurred. Black spots danced across my vision. The room spun, tilting and fading until it all dissolved into darkness. The pain vanished, leaving only a void. I was driving. The world around me was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by my headlights. The road twisted and turned sharply every few minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The argument replayed in my mind, her betrayal, her excuses, her hollow apologies. I had just discovered she was cheating on me, and I wasn't going back to her. Not now, not ever. A buzz broke my focus. My phone, sitting in the passenger seat, lit up with a new text. I didn't have to look to know who it was. "Are you still mad at me?" the message read. "What do you think?" I thought bitterly, refusing to take my hands off the wheel. Another buzz. "I'm really sorry," the next text read. Her grammar was flawless this time, a rare occurrence. She must have felt genuinely guilty, too little, too late. More messages flooded in, each one lighting up the phone screen like a beacon. The persistent buzzing clawed at my attention, pulling my gaze from the road. My hands tightened around the wheel, but the texts were relentless, demanding to be seen. My resolve weakened. My eyes flicked to the screen for just a moment. The blare of a horn. The flash of headlights. A sharp turn that came too fast. And then, nothing. I succumbed. My grip on the wheel faltered as I snatched the phone with one hand, my fingers trembling with the anticipation of crafting a venomous reply. The screen glowed in the dark cabin. My thumbs hovered, ready to type something vicious, something that would sting as much as her betrayal. But as I began, the car approached a sharp curve. Too late, I realized my mistake. My eyes shot up just in time to see the edge of the road vanish beneath my tires. Panic clawed at my chest. The car lurched, plummeting into the abyss. Time slowed to a crawl as the dread pooled in my stomach, acidic and unrelenting. My screams were swallowed by the rushing wind before everything vanished into black. I awoke with a start, gasping for air. My chest heaved, the sticky warmth of sweat soaking my skin. The memory of the fall clung to me, sharp and vivid, but as the terror began to recede, I noticed something else. A crushing weight pressed against my back, pulling my shoulders down. It was unbearable. My spine strained as if it might snap beneath the burden. Dazed and trembling, I craned my neck, desperate to see. What I found sent a new wave of horror coursing through me. Two massive, stark white wings jutted grotesquely from my back, their edges flecked with dried blood. "Oh, good. You're finally awake," came a voice, smooth and familiar. I didn't need to look to know who it belonged to. "I did a good job, didn't I?" the shorter angel chirped, his voice brimming with pride. The taller one sighed, his irritation evident. "Yes. This time, at least." My throat felt raw, my voice barely audible. How long was I out?" "Time is irrelevant," the tall angel replied. He strode over to me, his movements calm and measured, and began undoing the straps that held me in place. "We'll show you your job now. Follow us." I rose unsteadily, the pain in my back blooming with every movement. Each step sent fresh blood trickling down my spine, warm and sticky. My legs trembled beneath me, but I followed. What choice did I have? The colorless halls stretched endlessly before us. My mind buzzed with pain and confusion, too clouded to form coherent thoughts. All I could do was stumble forward, my feet dragging, my body an obedient shell. Time twisted unnaturally here. I couldn't tell if we'd walked for minutes or hours before we stopped. Ahead of us was a metal door, different from the others. It was thick and imposing, the only break in the monotony of the endless, identical halls. The tall angel pushed the door open without ceremony, stepping aside to let me pass. I froze. Inside was a nightmare. The room was a slaughterhouse. Angels, clad in blood-soaked aprons, worked tirelessly over tables. Their hands wielded bone saws and knives, hacking through flesh and bone with mechanical precision. Limbs, torsos, and unidentifiable parts were piled haphazardly in carts, dripping with fresh blood. And the angels themselves, those perfect, serene beings, wore wide, artificial grins. The expressions stretched too far, plastered across their flawless faces like masks. I stumbled back, my stomach lurching. What is this?" I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. "This," the tall angel said calmly, stepping in behind me, "is heaven's workforce. Would you like me to continue, or make any changes to this part of the retelling?" Some of the angels even hummed as they worked, their grisly tasks punctuated by an occasional cheerful note. Flecks of crimson clung to their pearly white teeth, glistening under the harsh overhead lights. As if on cue, several turned their heads toward me. Their smiles stretched wider, impossibly so, and a few waved, the casual gesture making my stomach churn. I stumbled back, desperate to distance myself, but my retreat was cut short when I collided with the shorter angel's chest. His hands clamped down on my shoulders with an unnatural strength, the pressure sharp enough to make me wince. "Go on," he sang, his voice unnervingly lighthearted as he shoved me roughly forward. I tried to pivot, to run in the opposite direction, but the heavy metal doors slammed shut behind me, their echo ringing like the toll of a bell. Sealing my fate. My body betrayed me, refusing to move. My screams remained lodged in my throat as I stood paralyzed, every nerve screaming to flee. The tall angel stepped into view, his expression serene, his movements methodical. In his hands, he held a pristine apron. "This is for you," he said, extending it toward me. I stared at the apron, its fabric an unblemished white, and I shook my head violently. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "No. Please." But my plea was useless. He shoved the apron into my trembling hands, then slipped into one of his own, a stark contrast to mine, smeared with gore and dotted with bits of unidentifiable viscera. "Come on," he said, his tone brisk. "We can't dilly-dally. We're on a very tight schedule." A tight schedule? I wanted to demand answers, but before I could muster the courage, the room fell silent. The far doors creaked open, the sound drawing every gaze toward them. The air grew heavy with tension as a hunched figure shuffled into the room, aided by a crane that groaned under its weight. The figure was ancient. His face was a map of wrinkles, deep and endless like dried riverbeds. The only hair on his frail body was a long, gray beard that nearly brushed the floor, matted with dark crimson streaks. His bloodshot eyes roved slowly around the room, taking in every detail with a deliberate patience. Even from a distance, the stench of decay rolled off him in waves, nauseating and pungent. When his gaze finally landed on me, my entire body locked up. Those eyes, they weren't just looking at me. They were seeing through me, piercing into my soul with an intensity that made my chest tighten. I was ensnared, trapped by their oppressive weight. He hobbled closer, every step deliberate and slow, his cane striking the floor with dull thuds. "Jason," he rasped, his voice brittle and dry, as if scraping against the edges of time itself. I could do nothing but nod, my throat too constricted for words. "Welcome." He smiled then, his lips pulling back to reveal rows of yellowed, crooked teeth. Gaps dotted his grin where teeth were missing, and the ones that remained jutted at odd angles. From this close, the putrid stench of his breath struck me, a rancid miasma that made my stomach churn violently. I didn't want to ask. The answer already lingered at the edges of my mind, dark and suffocating, but the silence grew unbearable. "You're saying," my voice quivered, barely above a whisper, "we're like pigs? Raised just to be slaughtered?" God stopped pacing and turned to face me, his crooked smile growing wider, revealing more of his rotting teeth. "Slaughtered?" he mused, tapping a long, yellowed fingernail against his chin. "Such a crude word, don't you think? I prefer to call it harvested." My stomach churned violently. "You mean to tell me," I stammered, each word like a jagged stone in my throat, "that humans, all humans, were created just to die? So you could harvest us?" God's laugh was hollow, echoing through the blood-stained room like a broken wind chime. "Not merely to die, Jason. To serve a purpose. Life is an energy unlike any other in this vast universe. Raw. Beautiful. And, yes, fleeting. You are born, you live, you love, you suffer, all of it feeds into that energy. It matures, it ripens. And then, at the moment of death," he clapped his hands together with a sickening squelch, "that energy is mine to take. It sustains this place. It sustains me." I stumbled back, my legs weak and trembling. "Why?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of my horror. "Why do all of this? Why even create us if you're just going to consume us?" God tilted his head, the motion slow and deliberate, like a predator studying its prey. "Why does an artist paint? Why does a composer write symphonies? Creation is the ultimate act of power and beauty. But sustaining that creation?" He gestured around the room, to the angels laboring over their grotesque tasks, to the racks of limbs, to the floor slick with blood. "That is the cost. And someone must pay it." My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of a benevolent God I had been taught with the abomination standing before me. "You're a monster," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. His smile faltered for the first time, but only for a fleeting moment. "A monster?" he repeated, his tone thoughtful. "Perhaps. But I'm also your creator, Jason. And you are part of my grand design. Your suffering, your joy, your sacrifice, it all plays a role in the order of things. I shook my head violently, the tears now streaming freely down my face. No. No, I won't do it. I won't be part of this horror. God sighed, a sound filled with something resembling pity, though it felt more like mockery. You don't have a choice, he said simply. None of you ever did. At that moment, the angels around the room stopped their work, turning to face me in perfect unison. Their faces still bore those grotesque, frozen smiles, but their eyes were hollow. Empty. God stepped closer, his presence suffocating, the smell of decay and iron enveloping me like a shroud. You will serve, Jason. Just like the others. And when your time comes, you will feed this place, as they have. It is inevitable. The room spun, the walls seemed to close in, and the weight of the wings on my back pressed down harder, as if to remind me of the chains I now bore. No! I screamed, my voice tearing through the oppressive silence. I won't. I can't. God's smile returned, wider and darker than before. Oh, but you will, he said softly. You already are. The saw felt impossibly heavy in my trembling hands, its cold steel biting into my skin. My reflection stared back at me from its polished surface, a distorted, pale face streaked with sweat and tears, framed by the grotesque wings I now bore. Around me, the angels had already resumed their work, their faces plastered with those unholy smiles as if nothing had interrupted them. I tried to fight it. My mind screamed for my body to drop the saw, to run, to resist. But no matter how much I willed it, my hands wouldn't obey. They gripped the saw tightly, as if guided by some invisible force. I took a shuddering step forward, then another, until I was standing over one of the countless bodies lying on a blood-slicked table. Smile, I heard the tall angel murmur from somewhere behind me. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of an unspoken command. My lips stretched into a grin so wide it felt as if my skin might tear. The body before me was unrecognizable, a mangled mass of flesh and bone. Yet, despite the carnage, I could make out features, a hand with delicate fingers, a face that had once carried an expression of life and love. A name flickered in my mind. Someone I'd known? Someone I'd loved? I couldn't tell. The saw moved on its own. The first cut was the worst. The blade tore through sinew and bone with a sickening resistance, sending a spray of warm blood across my face. My body worked mechanically, ignoring the rising bile in my throat, the tears blurring my vision. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the angels humming again, their voices a macabre symphony that drowned out the wet, sickening sounds of dismemberment. The tall angel approached, his ever-present smile even wider now. Good, he said approvingly, his eyes scanning my work. You're learning quickly. It won't be long before you're as skilled as the rest of us. The rest of us. I wanted to scream at him, to lash out, to demand an explanation. But my voice, like my body, was no longer my own. Instead, I nodded, the motion slow and mechanical, my forced grin still plastered across my face. He patted my shoulder lightly, his touch cold and devoid of warmth. Welcome to heaven, Jason, he said, before turning and disappearing into the endless rows of tables and bodies. I was left alone with the saw, the body, and the sound of my own sobs, muffled by the smile I couldn't stop. This was heaven. And there was no way out.